everyone. Welcome to another episode in the podcast 1000 Plus concert as a part of European project together with Musethica. We are today in
MDW, University of Music and Performing Arts, Vienna.
We have a very special guest today, Tabea Zimmermann. There is a famous talk show host, David Letterman, that says that has a program called "My Next Guest Needs No Introduction." And I think in our music world, there are few people that answer this description, and I definitely think that, Tabea, you are one of them. Nevertheless, we have listeners that are non-musicians, and I would make a short introduction of who Tabea Zimmermann is. Tabea Zimmermann is a German violist who has performed internationally both as a soloist and a chamber musician. She has been artist in residence of the Concertgebouw Orchestra, the Berlin Philharmonic, and the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra. In 2004, Zimmermann founded the Arcanto Quartet, a string quartet that performed until 2016. Several composers have written music for her, including Ligeti, the Viola Sonata, and she has made her own version of Bartók's Viola Concerto from the composer's sketches. Tabea Zimmermann is a professor at the Frankfurt University of Music and Performing Arts and gives masterclasses at the Kronberg Academy and elsewhere. Her awards include the 2020 Ernst von Siemens Music Prize. This is a very short description of the big life factory of Tabea. And hello, Tabea.
Hi, Avri. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We are dealing today with the theme of art of practicing, and it's a great honor to have you here with us. I will say a little bit, just few words. Why do we do that? It's sounds to me always a bit of even almost a cliche to speak about practicing. Practicing is a issue that all of us musicians have to deal with since we are very young and through our life, and it has become such an obvious thing that we often forget how to do that correctly. From my experience, and of course we would like to hear from your thoughts about it, traveling between different music universities, I do see a similar lack of information for the students and teachers in different countries, different continents, that actually connects one to the other. That's why for a few years I am trying to deal with this issue of art of practicing, and of course the Musethica program that is running this podcast and the European project also come to help young musicians to understand their function, to understand what they should produce, and so on. So I hope with the help of this podcast we could open few more minds, both for young musicians and of course for teachers or educators around the world. I think it is maybe one of the most important, I would say, part of the musician's life. And if we could have some information from someone like you, it will be wonderful. So again, thank you. And I wanted to start, Tabea, if you could tell us a little bit about your upbringing in Germany, your musical travel, your musical trip.
Sure. So I'm born in a small place that's called Lahr im Schwarzwald near Freiburg, close to the Swiss and French border in 1966, into a family with already 3 older siblings and later 2 more younger siblings. My parents had no musical background, were both in the war generation born in the war years and came from poor backgrounds and wanted to find a way to help the children to get out of the poverty. And one of the things that happened at that time in that little, really small town of, at the time, 20,000 people living there, was the opening of a music conservatory or opening of a string department. And the string department in that little Musikschule was a very, very special thing because it was a team of teachers who all had fantastic training. They came from Detmold University, where they studied with American musician George Nykrug, who was a direct student of Dunis, who was teaching in New York and who was one of the first musician doctors who had a very special approach to organic movements, taking musical ideas from natural phenomenon, learning about flexibility in the most fantastic way so that everything seems simple and easy, and to connect movement with imagination, muscular memory, with great imagination of the sound. And we got all that from very, very early childhood on, which was just fantastic. So my personal way started very early because of my three older siblings who played by then piano, cello, and violin. And I just wanted to be part of that music going on in the house and in the Musikschule, where my mother took my siblings practically every day. And so she asked the violin teacher of my sister, who was this most fantastic teacher, Dietmar Mantel. Unfortunately, he died very early when he just retired from his job. So at the time, now going back into my childhood, he was a very young man, just coming from university. He must have been 25 or something, ending his studies. A devoted teacher and chamber music lover. And the idea of the school was to train all content in music through chamber music. Of course, not only chamber music, but chamber music was the core of the school. So we all had small ensembles from very early on. So my first viola lesson, and I started viola because they needed small violists, and also they wanted to give me the instrument of my own and not to repeat an instrument that one of my siblings played already. So my first viola lesson was on December 1st, 1969, when I was 3 years and 2 months old. And then by the time I was 4, I was sitting in the first string quartet with other 4 and 5 years old. And then I had a string trio with my sisters from when I was 5 years old, and playing in several little ensembles and the kids orchestra and the bigger orchestra, and then the youth orchestra from the region, and then the Bundesjugendorchester, and so on. So this is going back to the early childhood.
You mentioned two wonderful words, actually, that for me, you said simple and easy. I think maybe one of the key words of music learning that is very seldom we hear. I usually hear how difficult it is. It's difficult and it's difficult. And if you could also, we could speak a little bit about this phenomenon. And maybe if you could mention your first teacher, which I had the honor to meet and to listen to his lessons, that I must say till today, I think of every word he said. And not only his Dunis way of teaching, but exactly this, all his approach. How were lessons with him? What was the main, when as a young girl? Can you describe a little bit how Mr. Mantel was teaching?
So here I have to explain something. My memory doesn't really go back to my beginning when I was 3 years old. And After learning with him for 10 years, I moved on to another teacher at Freiburg Academy, Ulrich Koch, who in one way was a wonderful teacher, but in another way tried to delete some of what I learned with Dietmar Mantel. And I think this was a process that created a little bit of a problem. And I see this as a teacher today as a very critical phase when we change teachers, how to build new knowledge on top of something that is already there. And after 6 years with Koch, I moved on to Sándor Vég, who was an amazing musician. And I'm mentioning this now, I didn't forget your question. I'm mentioning this because what happened when I came to Sándor Vég, by his imaginative language and the artistic approach to music, which was very different from what I learned with Ulrich Koch in Freiburg, which was much more pragmatic and fingering, bowing, many things like this. But with Sándor Vég, it was purely artistic. And the few lessons I took, they opened my memory to my first teacher. And this was the most fantastic thing that happened. So I'm now 19 years old. I'm spending these few months with Sándor Vég in Salzburg. And suddenly my brain tells me, wow, you've heard all this before. This was deeply ingrained in my brain, but it had been covered through that phase with my second teacher. So when I now talk about what I remember from my lessons with Dietmar Mantel, it's more the memory of the young adult, also starting to be a teacher at that time. I started very early. At 19 years old, I started teaching. And many questions from my students brought me to thinking back of how I learned it with Dietmar Mantel and what might have been his principles. And then I got in touch with him. So there has been a break between me as a child, then in adolescence, and then as a young teacher. I suddenly understood what wonderful source of learning I had. And then I started to talk to him and learn about the principles. So I think the main idea, and I try the same today as a teacher, is not even to mention difficulty, but to show possibilities, to lead the student by sometimes pictures, imagination, story, not talking about fingers, not talking about what you have to do, how you have to play, but to create an imagination of something and then experiment and find sounds and also physical experiences, how to balance the instrument and the bow, how to create a nice vibration in the sound and a resonant sound, and how to learn from harmonic intonation, overtones to make your instrument ring more, and all these things. It's all about a real physical experience. And I think by producing such good experiences in a lesson, you ingrain in the student something that you want to find again. And then it's not about a difficulty. It's about a great experience that you want to reproduce, because there is a real benefit from it, like the vibrations of the sounds. It's like therapy while you practice. So for me, practicing today even more and more clearly than when I was a young teacher is the most valuable time of experiment. It's like a laboratory. You look at some material, whatever it is you're working at, and you have to make a lesson full of changes, different aspects, addressing different parts of the brain and of the soul and of the body. And so it always has to be a complete thing. And to have a light spirit and fun And then working is rewarding and not hard. I agree with you that the word difficulty and fear, I also fear. I think many teachers ingrain fear in their students, and then they have to find a method to overcome that fear. But there are other ways to learn how to experience this beautiful thing that we call music making alone and with others. And if we learn skills, many skills, and skills that have a lot of variation, that are dynamic in the best sense, that you can adjust to anything that comes along your path, then you will always find a way. If your practicing is a repeated routine of avoiding mistakes or feeling pain in your body and just having to fill a certain amount of time because practicing has to be like that, then you will not enjoy being a musician, I'm sure.
I could imagine, I could, from my experience, it's not only not enjoy, it's actually very often you play worst. I sometimes say also to the students, hypothetically, if the most perfect result will come after suffering and physical pain, so I might recommend it, because in the end we would like to have a good performance. But we all know that there is a very strong correlation, exactly the opposite, that actually enjoyment or what you said, simple and easy, of course, this kind of approach is much more productive and much more helpful in performance. So my question to you, it's something that I'm wondering also many years myself. Why is it so seldom? Maybe it's a strange question, but why is it really seldom? It is seldom. We cannot avoid, and in this podcast we speak very directly about we want really to help, that in many traditional way of teaching the violin, the viola, the cello, the piano, or all instruments involve this kind of repetition, involve this kind of, like you said, okay, go for 3 hours and just come, or after 6 hours or for 8 hours, I've heard everything already. Where do you think it comes from, this kind of way of method of teaching?
I think we need repetition.
Of course.
And I also want to come back to the words simple and easy that you mentioned. I don't think playing a string instrument is simple or easy, but I think we have to make it seem easy, and we have to have a light spirit to include mistakes into the learning process and not repeat the same. I think a repeat should be full of variation.
Okay.
And then it's not just something where you can switch off your brain, but you have to be aware of the complex things we have to do. And let's face it, playing a string instrument is incredibly complex.
Absolutely.
One of the observations I made in the last years is that I think there is a big problem in our taking apart the left and the right hand and looking at what we do on the fingerboard and looking at what we do at the bow. From my observation, the main problems of side noise, for example, I think in string playing, we have, I would say there are four very big problems that we have to learn to overcome. And that is shifting to make it inaudible. Change of fingers on the fingerboard is always audible, unfortunately. A change of bow is often audible. And string changes. So all those four things we can master only if the left and the right form a fantastic team and learn about a very precise coordination and synchronization of action, but different action. It's a different action in the bow hand and the left hand, but the timing has to be incredibly precise in order to avoid all those side noises, for example. So it's a complex issue, and also the agility, the precision of intonation, the running on the fingerboards in a very sportive and virtuosic way. Nothing is simple, but we can make it, we can do it with too much muscle effort, and then it's painful, and it's also never elegant or really fast or whatever. So it's a question of efficiency. And I think if we address all those technical issues in a musical way, that we first of all know in which context are we at this given moment. What is the context? What are we doing? Are we checking intonation? Are we training flexibility for the hands? Are we dealing with coordination issues? Are we developing a musical phrase? Are we learning about speed? It's 100 different situations all day long in practicing. And I think the main point I would like to stress about practicing time is the awareness with which we go into practicing. So my idea would be that the first 20 minutes or whatever it takes is purely warming up, flexibility, feeling the body, getting flexible fingers and joints, and being in tune with your with your material. And then have a clear plan of what you are doing. Every moment of your practicing, I think, needs to have a conscious element, but in steps. I would say I imagine what I want to hear. I don't imagine what I want to do. I would create an image of what I want to hear. And this is what I learned with my first teachers, both with my viola teacher, but also with my piano teacher. I was not allowed to put a finger down before I could imagine the sound, the next sound, in its full, like everything about the sound, as many properties as possible. So this playing slowly with your mind, anticipating what's coming next, so your muscles can prepare going there. You find an efficient way for the body to go there, and then you aim for a precise sound that has been already in your inner ear. So I would call this principle, let the ear be your conductor. This is what I learned from my first teacher, and I really believe in this idea that we have to first of all train the inner ear to know what we want to come out. So, and then you define what you want to hear and not what you want to do. And then you look for many different ways to get to that sound. And by trying different ways, you will discover the instrument, and your abilities, your capabilities will grow by looking for more and more ways to do that. And then once you do get the sound you want, don't stop. Do it again with less effort, because this is a big secret of doing everything lighter. You will find out that you can get any good result with a little bit less effort that you think at first that you need. And by saving this little bit of energy that you can then put into the next elements or movements or sounds or musical ideas, whatever, your energies will grow and you can play with much more dynamic and ease. But I want to stress again, it's not easy, it's very complex, but I find beauty in this idea of making it seem natural and organic, even though it's incredibly complicated.
Of course, I have to thank you so much for your words, really. And I if I understand you correctly, and I would like to touch a little bit this point, because this is maybe the main Of course, I not only agree. You make me very happy. So, following your words, it's actually one of the recommendations for young musicians is actually to develop the inner, what you call the inner ear or the musical imagination. I sometimes call it the musical wish. It's different kind of terminology that exists in our mind before the hands or the body is doing something similar to lifting a glass of water. And I have a wish, I'm thirsty, and there is a glass of water next to me. My brain is doing something automatically incredibly fast. I don't think to release my shoulder and to open my fingers. It's something in the part of the brain that is automatic, makes it very nicely. And of course, in a much more complex thing, playing the viola or the violin or any instrument, we have maybe much more complicated also coordination and so on than lifting a glass of water. Even though lifting a glass of water is not a simple thing, I guess, for the brain. So again, coming to that, how would you recommend, so according to you, actually developing the musical imagination, musical wish, the inner ear is the key for a good let's say interpretation or performance or playing. So how would you approach that with a young musician? Because often, sorry to say, but often it's the opposite. Yes, often they take it, and they take the violin or this and they put first position, third finger, and this is a D. Yeah, but D is in our brain. So how would you do that?
I think training the ear is the first step for any musician. I think a musician is not someone with good hands or fingering or whatever. I think the hands can follow the ear in many ways. And this is maybe my biggest criticism to some teaching methods that I see when I see young people, that they are focused too much on the hands. It's like when you look at a conductor, it's the same. Some conductors train or look in the mirror and look at their hands. I think this is the most ridiculous method, because all you need is a good ear and a good musical idea, and then the hands will find a way to express the music. Of course, there is a technique to everything, and I'm not saying that I'm leaving out technique, not at all. I'm actually going very much into technical detail, but I think because everybody is so different, every player has to find some individual ways of getting to the results we imagine, and not my fingering or my bowing or my teacher's ideas will be good for any of my students. So I think it's important in musical teaching to know what are the things that are true for everybody and what's the individual part. And now when we talk about viola and the size of the instrument and the imagination of sound qualities, there is so much variety. And the people who play it go from, I don't know, I have small girls with thin fingers and tall guys with very big hands. It cannot possibly be the same advice I give for those people, because I have to help them become a refined and well-balanced musician with whatever their body is. So the body has to find individual solutions. And the ear is something I think we can agree, also in chamber music, we can agree on how a chord should sound as a total. And then every of the four players in a string quartet has to find their place. You have to know if you're the bass note or the fifth or the third or the seventh in the chord in order to know where to place your finger. And this idea of learning the principle of a string rather than a position of a finger is for me a very big thing. So for me, a beginning of learning string instrument certainly should not start with putting any dots on the fingerboard to help a child find quickly the second or the third finger, because it's always only approximate position. And I think what I got from my first teachers was learning the principle of the proportions of a string. So you would start with the open string and then the octave harmonic and then the fifth harmonic. So by doing this, you can learn already at very early age proportions and adjustment. It's always about adjusting according to what you have, what you want to imagine. Then try to find it again, do it a million times in many different ways and try to become quicker in finding the spot that corresponds to the note you want to hear.
So if I continue with this line, if we speak now about university students, let's say, if we speak about this imagination, would you recommend when you get a new piece, or actually even not a new piece, first to take the instrument or first to take the score and to try to sit with the score and to develop the musical, let's say, imagination, wish before we are starting with the instrument? Today, as you know, is very popular. People go first to YouTube and trying to listen to somebody that else how they play the piece. And maybe try to imitate or not try to imitate. What is your opinion?
I'm glad you mentioned this, Avri, because this is a big problem of the young generation, I think, that you want to come to a quick result. And of course, it's quicker if you already heard the piece played by one or several other people, but then you take away from yourself this option of discovering for yourself. And I think what I'm stressing now more than in earlier years of teaching is this courageous first approach to a piece. I'm doing a lot of sight reading with my students. Sight reading slowly, something that's not solo. I sit at the piano, I play the piano badly, but good enough to follow the harmonic structure. I can't do quick runs or anything, but so we go very slowly. And I'm often really so happy to see that when a student goes for a slow sight reading, they suddenly find their own instinctive discovering the music. So for me, it's important to find a slow enough tempo to get it right first time.
Okay, so this is, sorry, I have to touch it because this is exactly the definition of slow. Okay, very, very important to say, because people say slow. I mean, not enough people say slow, but also the one that say slow don't understand what slow is. So I would take your definition. I think it's a wonderful. So as slow as you could play it correct.
As slow as you can hear everything, not only what you play, but to place your note inside the context of something you haven't seen. There is a lot of, it can be slow, it depends on the music, but I'm also putting slow movements in front of them. So it's not that slow in the end, not much slower. It depends on the skills and it's a training thing. And the more often you do that, the quicker you're reading and imagining what might be. You know, you take a guess. You may be wrong, but you take a guess. Go for some expression. Don't take music and technique apart. Go for it. I think we're making this reading music and playing correctly. I say it in quotation marks because it's a big problem. There are so many ways to read a book. We can read the same text with different voices. You might stress another word than I might stress when I read the text. And I want them to learn that it's the same about music. Go for it. Take a courageous first guess, and then we can discuss and we can say, hey, maybe your theme wants to go this way and my voice in the piano part says something else. So we have to start discussing. But a lot of this first reading is a lot of fun for them. And it's building trust in their ability to read, imagine, do, adjust, communicate with other players. It's training so many skills that we need as a musician.
Of course.
And
yes, sorry.
I find that important, yeah.
You know, I have to touch another subject again that I think maybe is for you so obvious, and it should be obvious, with your also luck growing up in this environment that you mentioned before, which is listening. You mentioned it a few times in your talk, and it seems to us exactly again so clear and so obvious that we have to listen. You know, I remember, Tabea, one little funny thing, or not funny, but interesting thing, that I had the honor to have you as a guest in my class in Spain, and I picked you up and we went to your hotel, and you told me I need 10 minutes with the viola just to do some little chromatic exercise on your viola or something like this. And I asked her, and you told me, it's so much listening. You said, I have to listen now very carefully for so many students that are coming. And this is something that I think we are, again, funnily enough, I think this is our job actually, to listen. Funnily enough, we don't put enough attention of listening, because everything you mentioned, when we have a wish before, we have to also have some kind of a parameter if we are doing it according to our inner ear or to our musical wish. And this we have to also listen when we play. We have to listen if we play even alone, of course, or we play with our colleagues, so it's even a bit more complex. But this is something, if you could also speak about your experience developing listening, which I think there are ways to do that. And I think because there's so many elements outside musical elements, which is, the fear of critique, which is maybe a feeling of comparison, especially in the music institutions, education institutions, that are nothing to do with actually music making, that sometimes going over our ability to listen. You need a certain kind of concentration, or even in a way relaxation, to really concentrate on inside of every note that we played. As you mentioned, if we play it really slow, that we have time to listen to that. And is there something that you do with your students regarding listening, or speaking about the ability to really listen?
For me, it's interesting that you stress it so much, because it is really obvious for me that
it's so not obvious, Tabea. I'm sorry. I mean, it's obvious for speaking about musicians. It's true, but sorry, maybe, going around, I don't see it enough, even in teachers, by the way, even among teachers, because also as teachers, it's difficult to teach sometimes, because our brain is full with information that we would like to hear, or we know the piece and we have it already in our mind, but we have to teach in a very, let's say, naked way, to the person that is playing in front of us, to listen to really, sometimes even, I sometimes close my eyes, because we sometimes listen also with our hands, and thinking about technical solutions before we even hear what is going on. So I don't think, I know that for you it's obvious, but I have a feeling it's not so obvious for everybody. It's obvious to speak about it, but in reality, this concentrating of listening to everything, to intervals, to really listen, is not, I find, not such a simple thing.
So maybe I do this in the first semester with my students when they come. Mm-hmm. But I do it in a way where I wouldn't say now we have to learn listening and you have to focus on this or that. I'm showing them by playing together. Actually, I'm playing with them probably 50% of the lesson time. I'm playing with them, either at the piano or at the viola. I'm taking the score of whatever piece they play, and I'm choosing a voice to give them some kind of context. It could be a rhythmical context. It could be harmonic context. It could be, I don't know. It really depends on the music we are doing. But so in the first semester, when someone joins my class, I would probably go surprisingly slow in discovering harmonic intonation. You know, for me, there's nothing more beautiful than the overtones, trigger the overtones and get the instrument to resonate and get a full sound without much physical input. Yes, there is energy that you have to direct into the string so that the string can trigger the vibration of the bridge and go into the wood and make the whole instrument resonate, and then you get this feedback into your body. And by playing not alone but with some other voice, you learn in every single moment of music making that you have to put your note into context. And it's this context of playing with others, one or two others at slow tempo at first, to find the harmony or the symphonic sound, something that rings together. So your responsibility is only a partial responsibility. We're never alone with what we do. And you can share the responsibilities between the players, and then automatically you want to listen.
Yeah.
And you will react. It's also training reaction. You know, I think as a musician, we have to really react incredibly quickly to other people, to the acoustics in the room, to the humidity that changes our bow hair and the tension of the whatever. Everything is different every day. We are different every day. And I want to repeat what I said in the very beginning, that a repetition should never be the same. Let's train the variety. My example would be like if you go on a daily walk. Let's say you walk through a park from home to work or whatever. And you go every day in the morning, and in the evening you go the same way. But it actually is not ever the same. So the tree is in the same place and the house is in the same place. But the light is different, temperature is different, humidity is different. There are different birds singing on different trees and whatever. And I think going through a score is a little bit the same way. There are structural elements that I want to absolutely respect what the composer put on paper in the form, the shape, harmonic structure, orchestration, phrasing, whatever. Down to the smallest detail, I want to do exactly what the composer gave to us. But then there are many other elements that we can shape. How you develop your sound, how dynamic you open, how you make the tempo feel, to find harmony between a musical tempo and the, let's say, the speed of your vibrato, for example, change of bow pressure, whatever. That makes the individual elements. That's why we can hear the same pieces over and over again from different people, and it doesn't need to be boring. It can be super nice and interesting to find both elements to be true to the text and yet to find the space for the individual interpretation. And this is a lot of fun.
So maybe the word repetition has a little bit of problem. Maybe we should use other word, because I of course agree completely. Not only the trees, of course, but the earth is is, as far as I know, turning. Nothing is actually repeats itself. Everything is new. So according to you, if we play the phrase, let's say, and we played it again, so maybe the word repeats is not really accurate, but maybe we have to again think and again, or think or feel, or every time from new.
And also give yourself a new goal. This is what I would do. Okay. I would repeat many times to ingrain the motorical easiness, the effective sound production, the precision, whatever. Yes, I do repeat, but I wouldn't try to do it twice the same. I would do it at different speed, a different dynamic, with a different content. You can say the same sentence with different tone. You can emphasize a tragic element or a dramatic element. You can find a humor in something. So you have to question the score that is in front of you and ask, what kind of theme are you? You know, I'm playing a sonata for, I don't know, many hundred times again, but I would find a new idea every time. So surprise yourself, find different ways of hearing it and saying it, and then it's not a routine that you build up, but it's a flexibility of learning, like the chemistry between the materials.
You mentioned before coordination. I remember your first teacher, Mr. Mantel, saying there was a very nice student play there, and he solved, let's say, or helped her solve some issue that she had. I even remember the piece. And then he told me outside, he said, it's 95% coordination. We solve almost every, let's say, I speak about, of course, technical or motorical issue concerning, of course, a musical wish with coordination. This is another subject that is relatively, of course, you mentioned Dunis. I don't know how popular is it today throughout the world, but it's also, again, everything that you speak of, or mostly what you speak of, is about training the mind. Yes, training the brain. Coordination, of course, is something to do with brain and motoric. Is this some exercises that you also do with yourself or with your students that has to be done regularly?
Yeah. I don't have a strict program of exercises or scales or arpeggi, but I find that the tradition of warming up with scales, for example, is often done badly. I wanna say that.
Please.
I think we accept on the string instrument too often all those 4 big hurdles that I mentioned before. Now, let's say a scale where, apart from the harmony in the tonality in which you play, I think the notes should be rather even, not the same, but I don't want to hear the shift between the second and third position or fourth and fifth every time I do the scale. So if I go back to this Dunis example, he gives exercises how to learn a scale shift and how the scale shift is different from a shift in a melody where you want to actually enjoy the combination or connection between 2 notes. But in a scale shift, you should learn to do it inaudibly. So he trains, for example, it's a very cool exercise. Do you know that? The
Yes.
Dunis exercise for scale shift. So whatever shift you have to do it first at much higher speed and in a kind of reflex movement with a you will not hit the right note in the beginning. You will do a mistake, but do it with a joint movement, not muscle movement. Don't go with your muscles from one position to the other, but place your wrist in between the 2 notes that you want to connect and move your wrist so quickly that you just come to the new position. Let me try to sing what I have in mind so you know what I'm doing. So let's say you play da da dee dee dee, and in between those first 5 notes you have a shift, of course, because we have 4 fingers for all we have to do. And now let's say you go 0, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you would train to go doyon first, very, very quickly, a few times. Doyon. So you play the scale da dee doyon dee dee, which means you first do an ridiculous high speed, and then the second time you do it so easily because it's a reduced speed suddenly, and that's the one you want to keep. So later you do the scale without those little fast movements, but that's one example of how music and technique have to work together. You have to have a goal of avoiding noises that we get used to from our instrumental limitations. I want to mention one musician who taught me a lot without being my teacher. He was a musical partner that I played a lot with. This is a pianist, Hartmut Höll, who was playing as an accompanist with singers for all his life. And we did in the 90s a project of Schubert's Winterreise. And when I played the songs, he asked me, said, "What's that? What's happening between those two notes? Why is this note sounding different from the previous one?" Or he just asked because he didn't know the limitations of the string instrument that I got used to by doing it. Yeah, exactly. And I learned absolutely the most from his questions. And I then realized, okay, this was fourth finger, had a poor sound quality. This was a string change. This was a shift and all those things. So I learned from a not string player who had only a musical idea, but not the instrumental idea. And that gave me a lot to think about. And I think it's at that moment when I then also started teaching in Frankfurt for the first time in 94. That might have been a period when I really revised a lot of my own playing techniques through those questions that I learned from.
But this is you are actually supporting what I said before. When we teach our instrument, we have as teachers, let's say right now, we are not of course not objective. Let's say we are very subjective because we have some kind of a tolerance. If we want it, if we don't, for the, let's say for this, what you mentioned, this complex of the difficulty, if it's shifting, if it's bow change and so on. And this is what is so wonderful to play for a person that just care about the musical phrase. And then actually the technique is for us, it makes a lot of sense because it's following only the musical idea and not what we call the difficulty, for example, in a shifting. If we think how difficult a shifting is, of course, it will be difficult, and also we probably will hear it. And if we will follow the musical wish, let's say from you or from him in that sense, then the figures will, I guess, will follow our mind. So yes, I think it's. I think it's wonderful, and I think also we know that very often when we have an issue, or let's say we call it a difficulty for the sake of this conversation, we are doing something very often wrong with our bow, and vice versa. And when you have something challenging with the bow, we are doing something problematic with the left. So this is why the coordination here takes part.
I'm glad you mentioned the bow, because also I'm thinking now of one detail that I want to highlight, something that I hear very often and that I want to really talk about. And that is, I would call it a deflating down bow. You know, in Baroque music, for example, the bow had a much... the bow, as it was built and as it was used, had much more direction in playing. So the down bow could be heavier and the up bow lighter. But later we have to learn how to do any kind of sound in any bow direction. It can't be that every down bow lets the air out of a phrase, and that's why I call it deflating. It's for me really like I see someone touch the bow and they go pff. It's like with a needle in a balloon. This can never come to a long phrase if the down bow always feels heavy and letting the air out, as I would say. So we have to learn to first decide how many notes or how much time do we want a sound to develop? So to create a kind of arch-like construction, I would like a bridge or something. You start in a low point, you create tension, and you then have relaxation. I think actually when we go to the deep detail in music, it's all about tension and release. But it can't be that we go like our body in breathing in, out all the time, then we can't play a long phrase. So what I observe often is a kind of wrong dependency between the body and the bow. I see, I don't want to mention names, but there is a school, one famous school in the States, where a lot of the players have this connection that I find very, very dangerous, where you hear breathing, physical breathing, getting in front of the musical breathing.
Okay.
Because they're being taught to connect their body to the playing, but it's in a way where it's limiting and not freeing. And I would like to go exactly the opposite way. I think we have to know what's happening in the body when we breathe in and exhale, and then we can learn to play with our bow as if natural breathing. But as soon as you can do that, you also have to do the opposite. And then you have to detach your body in a way that you can have on a string instrument. Finally, the string player can have a longer cantabile phrase than a singer, because we actually do not have to physically breathe in that moment. That's the wonderful thing of the string instrument, that we can have a natural phrase, but we also can have a much longer phrase.
Of course, but I must say something. Please tell me if I'm in the wrong direction. I really think, and I will put it a little bit in more simple terms. When we speak about coordination, which I think is the key here also for what you mentioned, this downbow diminuendo or crescendo by upbow, has to do very often in my ears and eyes of separating the right from the left, because people play the bow on the viola. Instead, maybe the viola to the bow, or maybe both of them together, as you mentioned that, which then actually will avoid this. If we play consciously with the right, so okay, it's naturally what you call it. Okay, the frosh is a bit heavier than the top. The difference is not, of course, big in human terms, few grams. But if we are consciously doing it, of course, it will happen. If we are putting both instrument and bow together, then I think could be very easily avoided. Am I?
Of course, I completely agree. And this is why I often say I'm a musician playing the viola and I'm not a violist. For me, the viola is too small. It's just an instrument. It's not more. So it depends on many more factors what comes out, how your viola sounds, but it's not the instrument itself. Any musician, take a pianist. Many pianists are so aware of the limitation of the keyboard instrument that they actually have a much nicer legato than we have, even though we have potentially much better options to do a long legato. I like to learn from piano a lot, also because I'm aware of the fact how many composers have been pianists and composed from the piano, from the score, adding a melody instrument. And I think, take our famous Brahms sonatas, it should be the same musical experience. It can be a different sound world, but it shouldn't be a viola sonata with a wobbly vibrato from beginning to end, because that vibrato is not part of the aesthetic of the time. I really strongly oppose that idea that more vibrato is better than less vibrato. I think vibrato is one big chapter that we have to learn to vary, to use it specifically, to find criteria for vibrato, register what's the vibration, what's the frequency of a note, and then find the vibrato that supports that frequency. So,
of course,
on 440A, we should do 440 little oscillations per second. Yeah, of course we can't. But if we play, let's say, 3 A's on the instrument, a low one, the middle A, and a high one, and we are told to use the same vibrato, that cannot sound right because the frequency each time is double speed in the octave higher, or
of course,
half speed in the octave lower. So let's adjust our vibrato first and foremost to the frequency, then to the speed of the piece, to the character of the piece, to the neighboring note.
Exactly.
You can use the same vibrato if you play a chromatic line. Then your vibrato is already disturbing in the neighbor's garden.
You'll be surprised how little I also hear people, even in the masters, even ask themselves what is actually vibrato. What is the overtone phenomenon of vibrato? Why do we hear that? Why the speed? I mean, you would be, yes, maybe you will not be surprised, but all these deals are some things definitely to dedicate time and think about it. It's all physical phenomenon vibrato. It's not, and by the way, which direction the vibrato goes, it's also another thing that, again, very seldom I find people that really actually thought about this and really understood. So,
can we talk about vibrato a little longer?
Please.
I recently have a few students who struggle with their own vibrato, and I've seen some phenomenon that I would like to address, and that is teachers telling people teaching the mechanics of vibrato irrespective of a body, irrespective of size of arm, size of instrument, character of the music. I think this is creating mental blockages that are so difficult to overcome. I've seen it now a few times, and unfortunately, those go back to either the same previous teacher or a same school of doing the vibrato in a mechanical way, training, in a kind of, I'm really sorry for the young students who had a teacher like that. And I find it very, very hard as a teacher to give them new information that bypasses the problematic zone, because this is what I believe and what I learned from my first teacher. The only way to put in new information in an adult musician, let's say you're 24 years old, you want to learn something new about vibrato. I don't want to interfere with the movement that they've learned. I want to show them another way, but it's very, very difficult. So my way of teaching vibrato would be always in connection to a change, not to have a long sustained note with the same vibrato. I find that is a real source of physical and mental blockage if we ask a student to do that. It's unnatural. So what I would do is take one finger up bow starting from zero sound, pianissimo, then developing that sound in crescendo and getting more intense, and on the bow change, release a little bit and let the vibrato have an after shaking kind of element, and then relax. So again, tension and release. First, create a beautiful development art like construction, and then you can try, once you get that, you can try to prolong that. And through the prolongation, you might get to a long sustained note. But if you start with your goal having a sustained long note, your vibrato is only mechanical and cannot be used for music. It sounds really not nice.
But exactly but exactly like you mentioned. If I go back, if we speak about this physical phenomenon, and you mentioned very well, the vibrato has a rhythmus, and this rhythmus has to be natural. So mechanical, we cannot create the effect of overtones, rhythmus in vibrato. If, for example, I see very often people, like you said, like you mentioned correctly, work on this mechanical vibrato with a very stiff elbow, for example, or a very stiff hand. It's all these things are connected to create a natural gravitation movement that could apply to a deeper sound or a higher sound. Needs this flexibility. So it's a big mechanism that has to be considered together, and mainly. Going back to what you said, mainly to answer our musical wish. Or I would even say it, I usually use something else. I ask myself, what do the listeners hear when I play this vibrato, or when somebody plays a certain vibrato, and if this is what I want them to hear. So it's mechanical is something very too subjective for us playing to other people. If we play only for ourselves, or this is, I think, also maybe the difference between, let's say, what people will define themselves as amateur musicians. They play with their friends, with a glass of whiskey and a cigar, wonderful. And the moment that you have to go to a concert place, or in Musethica, we go to different places, and you play to other person, you have a different responsibility. And then this is, of course, what they hear, what they accept. So I think all these decisions, exactly what you said, has to be considered with every note, every choice, the wideness, the rhythmus. Again, I'm saying people are playing vibrato also very often over the tone. So then the interval to the next one is gone. So all this, and then that's why I'm saying, Tabea, about repetition, because I hear, and then they go to the room and they're doing it 5 hours more, the same, and then they come to the stage and they tell me, I'm so nervous, and I'm so, and then of course they have to play in front of people, which is very seldom, unless a miracle happen, could be better. Yeah, usually, of course, we lose a little bit, or it's a bit worse. So, and then this is why we do also this podcast, to help these people. Said, okay, stop 1 second, and don't go again and do these kind of things for 4 more hours, and then let's say be surprised that you are extremely nervous and in front of other people when you didn't achieve with yourself, or what you said has this. Beautiful feeling of discovering and of producing a musical phrase. So this is exactly. It's thank you very much for touching that. I think this is also the purpose of that self-investigation. And if I spoke about what we call stage fear, we are coming to the end of the hour. Of course, big tema, big subject, not only in music, in sports, in lectures, in everything. Something that we have to deal daily. I think listening to you, I feel that this way of what we call practicing also a difficult term, maybe could also reduce what we call stage fear or nervousness and so on. What would you say about that?
For me, it's important that the students I work with are constantly sharing their musical experience, and I'm trying to take away the special situation of being on stage by creating many possibilities for them to play for others. I'm not doing it in such a beautiful way than you do it with your Musethica. I think you have really created a fantastic project. Avri, I want to congratulate you and thank you for what you're doing with Musethica. It's really great. I'm doing it in a much smaller way in my teaching by opening my doors. I'm never in a one-to-one teaching situation. Unless a student says, I really need a private lesson. But otherwise, the door is open. Other students can join. And I'm very happy for the class to learn together, because actually we learn so much from seeing how others struggle with the same things or with other things. We can learn from outside our body by observing others and then taking out elements that are more general, and then defining the specific individual problems. And that's why, yes, we do have one-to-one lessons, but we are not alone in a room. We're sharing it and we're testing with listeners how our intentions actually come through. And I think what I'm creating for my students is absolute normal thing. It's normal to share music with others, either by reading together, music sessions, reading sessions, open lessons, many kind of class auditions where everybody will play their etude. And yes, they try to avoid it and they try to escape. But then once we all do it, it's actually wonderful to see, to share what we are going through. What's the process? Everybody can speak a minute about their etude, for example, and say the chapter that I'm working on is this and that, and have found these and these difficulties, and these are my solutions, and now I'm going to try it on you, and you're my test audience. And by doing this and by focusing always on the music that's in front of us, I try to show them and teach them that if we focus on the music, our body and our mind will be much more free and open to what we call inspiration and the moment and spontaneous music making and all these things, than if we are locked into our body trying to repeat something that we did in the practice room. I honestly think it is not possible, and it will always be a source of frustration that when we try to repeat exactly, that we will fail. But if we want to go for a small variation, and I'm really talking about subtleties, and this is what makes the art of music so rich, that playing dynamically doesn't mean playing loud and soft all the time, but to have very small changes and to lead the musical tension, to channel it into a peak moment of a phrase, a peak moment in the movement, and having small relaxation and small tension, and being able to control your body according to what's in your score. That's a very high level of being an artist. But then you are free inside the frame of the score, and your mind can wander, and you will help your audience to have amazing associations while they listen to you, and wanting you to experience music together as a player and an audience, and not just waiting for mistakes.
Exactly. This is beautiful words, and I thank you so much for it. It's a really inspiring talk with you, Tabea. You know what you said about now letting the listeners have their different kind of imagination and associations, and maybe this is our function as professional musicians, and to reach that, really coming all the things that you mentioned before. It's a big responsible job. We see it, and thank you for mentioning Musethica. We see it in Musethica from day one. This something that I must admit, didn't expect. very strong correlation between this quality of playing, and you mentioned overtone, you mentioned the sound quality, how physical phenomenon it is on the listeners, especially listeners of Musethica, that most of them have never had any encounter with classical music, on their attention, on their different kind of reaction and so on. And I would maybe end this talk today with a very nice quote that one of the prisoners in the prison that we played concert came to us very shy after the concert and said that, "Thank you so much. You took me outside of these walls for 1 hour." And this is sometimes something I think we all wish that also the audience in the concert house and the Philharmonie will be for 1 hour outside of their walls. We are all inside of walls, and to reach that, of course, one has to follow, of course, all these subjects that we spoke about today. Tabea, thank you again.
You'll find all the information and links in the show notes, including more about our guest, upcoming episodes, and the 1000+ concert project. Thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward for the next time.